Hello, welcome to the video. I apologize if the sound quality isn't up to the usual standards. It's just too hot and humid out to be under a blanket recording this, so I apologize for that. I am here to talk about Lightyear long after the first big wave of reviews and everything else upon its theatrical release in June, I think that was. I did not see it in the theater, for one thing because I'm cheap. And then the other reason is that I just didn't want to. There were questions about potential tie-ins to the Toy Story universe and all that, and that kind of got my brain firing. But beyond that, especially after the follow-up trailers, I just haven't cared all that much after seeing the movie, which, by the way, I watched it because it is now available for streaming on Disney+. I don't really feel all that differently about it. This is not a movie that electrified me in any way. Just taking a brief glance at critics and audience reception to the movie, that seems to be par for the course. I think a lot of the consensus here has just been, it's an okay little movie and not really much more than that. This will not be a big structured video essay. This is not about like the downfall of Pixar and blah 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 blah. No, it's not about anything ruining childhoods, anything like that. No. I'm just gonna share some thoughts in a pretty unstructured format, although I think for the most part I'll try to talk about positives first and then get into some of my critiques or just negative considerations about the movie. So if that sounds okay to you, let's go ahead and get started. Positives. I will say that the cast overall pretty good, and I mean specifically voice acting. Like, I'm not talking about character development and ensemble and all that, just the voice acting. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of a single person who did voice acting in the movie, but everyone was pretty spot on given their roles, given the overall tone of the movie. Nobody was over the top cartoony performance. I guess you could maybe argue the silly comedy robot Socks the Cat goes into that territory, but it makes more sense for that type of character to do that. That's their role, but otherwise, really solid performances. I believed that this was a semi-serious fictional universe. I believed that the character of Buzz Lightyear really wanted to accomplish his goals. Again, I wouldn't call these performances electrifying or beautifully done. No, serviceable to pretty darn good. Definitely want to mention that. Also, visually, yeah, come on, it's a Pixar movie. They got the money, they got the talent, and time again, they impress, or at the very least, do a very fine job, do a very technically adept and at times cutting-edge job of realizing all these fictional worlds and wacky characters and situations. I'll get to like general world building and structure, I guess, and the type of movie this is trying to be later on, because I think that falls on the negative side for me. However, just in terms of how it looks, pretty darn good. Lovely lighting, a few exciting spacey elements for which the visuals are realized very well, believable, and I guess this sort of gets into, what do we even call it in animation, like production design? I don't know, concept design stuff potentially, but just the way that tech was realized within this world. And I don't know if this is really a spoiler if you've seen the trailer before, but we're also talking about seeing this fictional tech over quite a large span of time within this universe, so it sort of develops along the way. There are different eras of technology within this world, and yeah, just the way that ships were executed, especially various vehicles, that's what really stood out to me as just being really darn neat. The way that you can kind of push and pull stuff around, and oh, this little throttle thing, you can do this and switch it up to the side. They highlighted that at moments as well, which makes me think They knew this was really cool tech. Maybe it also leans into the toyetic side of things. Like, are they making a bunch of toys out of this movie? I wouldn't be surprised to hear that they are, but at the time of recording, I've got no idea. Regardless, just as tech in a movie, neat. Positive feelings overall for how the movie looked and just like the sense of place within this universe. Wasn't crazy about like the alien Vine enemies. Did that ever like resolve to anything, or was that just like a standard, oh, we need some kind of vague threat that they can easily overcome, but it makes you feel like the area is hostile to their presence, which is another thing that I didn't feel was really touched on much at all, was just the idea of like, oh, they're essentially colonizing this planet where there is clearly pre-existing life, arguably pre-existing sentient life, and the Star Trek in my head just kicks up and goes, no, you can't do that. Stop. You can't just set up shop and make no attempt over multiple decades to communicate with the existing life on this planet. You can't just do that. You can't just barge in and thrash stuff to fit your needs. Anyway, not super relevant to the overall discussion of the movie, but it's that kind of sci-fi where the universe itself and the things they encounter are just a backdrop for our human characters to do cool stuff and for our human characters to, develop and change, because it's ultimately all about them. Whatever. It's a movie about Buzz Lightyear, and maybe this is the moment where I need to switch over to some of the negative stuff. If I have another positive thing to say and I remember it, I will mention it, but I have a feeling most of the rest of the things I will be saying here are largely negative. One of the funniest things, I already mentioned at the top how when that initial teaser came out, it was like, oh, okay, we know it's Lightyear, and it's the story of Buzz Lightyear, origin, whatever. So how does this tie into the Toy Story universe? Is this supposed to be the movie that was promoting it at the time? Is this supposed to be like a reboot of Buzz Lightyear in the Toy Story world, but at the time equivalent to our time? So it's like long after Andy has grown up and everything. Long story short, it is exactly that. And it is supposedly the movie, Toy Story in-universe movie, that really got Andy hyped up to receive a Buzz Lightyear. It wasn't all the commercials we saw. It wasn't that his friends had it or anything like that, apparently. I guess it was this movie. It was this pretty mediocre spaceman movie based on a toy, or made to sell a toy. Not just in our actual reality, but in the reality of Toy Story as well. Okay, conceptually, whatever, kind of neat. And in fact, I think that idea gives so many opportunities to do some really creative stuff in terms of executing on that concept. So like when I first, considered that possibility, I thought it was a neat idea because, okay, how do you make a movie feel like it fits within the Toy Story universe? I don't really feel they went that direction. I think it just ends up feeling like a very contemporary space movie we would get right now. It doesn't even feel like something that would be made in the 90s. They even say this is from 1995 in the Toy Story universe. This movie was released in 1995, and that's why Andy wanted a Buzz Lightyear. And by the way, right before the movie kicked up and started, I was thinking, is there going to be some like really neat meta element at the end where they kind of zoom out or we pull back from the screen in the movie theater and, oh, there's Andy, but it's very artfully done. It doesn't feel hokey or cheesy. And that's how we know that it wraps into that story. No, what they do instead, the first thing you see is just some white text on a black background. Not a crawl, not a sci-fi crawl. The text just comes up, it fades in, and then it fades out each line, and that's it. They just have a couple lines that tell you straight up, this is from 1995. This is why a boy named Andy wanted Buzz Lightyear. And I thought that was absolutely hilarious because it was the total absence of creativity or any kind of cleverness. Like, why even do it at all at that point? Like, was that supposed to be a big wow moment in the theater where people going, whoa, now I understand? Like, I feel like a lot of us assumed that. That's just something you mention in like behind the scenes interviews, and suddenly people go, oh wow, that's pretty neat. So on that front, I just feel like there were a lot of missed opportunities for creativity of execution, generally disappointing, which leads into my broader feelings about the movie as a whole, which is basically the same thing, just disappointing. It's not so bad that it makes me angry. It's not something that I'm upset to see other people enjoying. Competent all around. It's one of those, but also why? Is it really so hollow as everybody knows Buzz Lightyear? Buzz Lightyear is incredibly famous. Do something with that. I don't know, we're not making another Toy Story movie right now. Just do a Buzz Lightyear thing. Is that it? Were people invested in the idea? Were people really excited about the opportunity and let's explore this character in some way? That could definitely be the case. I didn't feel that. I did not feel like the team was excited about this one. Sorry, I know that's speculation about behind the scenes stuff. And again, it's a lot of people doing their jobs and doing their jobs incredibly well. I'm very happy about that. However, if you've been around the channel for a while, this is an idea that I've brought up multiple times and even made a whole video about called something, are Disney and Pixar falling behind the times, essentially. And by that, I don't mean that they're failing financially. They're absolutely not. I'm sure this movie alone made a whole bunch of money. But in terms of what I really value in animation, I just don't feel like I'm getting a lot of those elements from Disney and Pixar these days very much at all. Things that I value like just sheer originality, creativity of the movies, ideas that are not based on previous properties or stories or concepts. It's genuinely new stuff. A lot of their movies can feel incredibly personal, even though they have this pretty rigid structure in terms of emotional manipulation of the audience and all that. It works most of the time, and that structure has allowed them to do some fantastic stuff and really reach audiences and even different types of audiences. And more recently, I just don't feel that energy from the more recent movies for the most part. There are bright spots, aside from the fact that Lightyear is obviously based on a pre-existing property and gets greenlit for the name recognition. What else? Is it this fascinating new world? No, not really. It feels like a melding of different sci-fi stuff we've seen already. And as I touched on earlier too, a lot of that sci-fi backdrop just feels like window dressing. I don't always feel like these elements were explored in a satisfying way. I don't feel like, in certain ways, it doesn't feel like it's taking advantage of the fact that it is sci-fi. Sci-fi is an incredibly versatile genre. It can be a fantastic way to explore a lot of human themes and very relatable characters, regardless of whether they happen to be human or not. And here, I'll give some kind of credit for what they're trying to do with the character of Buzz Lightyear. I guess this is technically a spoiler, so feel free to hop out if that bothers you. But what they're ultimately getting at here, aside from, oh my gosh, the real basic surface level thing here is just that Buzz Lightyear doesn't trust people and feels responsible for everybody and is not good at working with a team. And you know that within the opening sequence. At least myself, I was just thinking, oh great, now we have to, like, for real, that's what the movie's about, and we're just gonna have to watch him learn how to work with a team? Okay, so there's that, but then beyond it, they try to get into this area of feeling like you need to matter, quote unquote, like you really need to have an impact on your time and you know, the people around you, the world around you. You need to make a name for yourself and do something really important in all capital letters. That is a more interesting theme to me. That's an interesting message in some ways, and that is the one thing that really does kind of utilize the sci-fi world that we're in. Like, it uses time travel essentially and almost kind of multiverse stuff. Here we are again with the multiverse, to explore just this character of Buzz Lightyear and like, oh, he's hard-headed and stuff, and here's where that can take you. Here is like the very negative and destructive place that can take a person. Don't do that. It is not without messaging. It's not bereft of themes or anything like that. It's okay, but we know already. We know. In fact, I'm gonna go out on a limb here maybe and say that this kind of movie, a movie like Lightyear, coming from a studio like Pixar, is sort of shocking for how it doesn't feel like it fits into the category of adult-friendly animation that I've talked about so many times. This idea of it works equally well for young audiences, adult audiences, any age range. I don't feel that here. This feels like a movie for kids. And even from that viewpoint, I almost feel like it's aiming low there too. Like, I feel like a lot of kids also understand this stuff already. I especially the teamwork thing, like trust and cooperation, and probably the most negative aspect, the aspect of the movie that I enjoyed or appreciated the least was the script. Ultimately, my goodness, the way the dialogue was handled, especially early on when they're just trying to establish like, it's kind of like a buddy cop dynamic, you know, they go on adventures all the time that we haven't seen, and now they have their little adventure, and now you need to care about them. They even do the, what is now maybe considered a Pixar classic, which is accelerating a life and just showing some of the most cliche, quote unquote, important moments in that person's life. And then they die, and you're supposed to feel bad about it and feel, you know, impacted emotionally. Up is the obvious go-to with the married life sequence, which works even though we barely know the characters at that point. We've had one full scene with them, but all of a sudden we care and we are invested. And here it just felt like paint by numbers a little bit. Oh, look, it was getting married. This character's getting married. That's something everybody does. That's just a part of human existence, I guess. And then they have a kid, which I guess is also just standard. That's par for the course. That's what you do as a human. Of course, obviously, you have a kid. Or who doesn't have kids? Who doesn't get married and have a kid at some point in their lives, right, everybody? Didn't work for me. And beyond that, yeah, it's supposed to feel like, oh, this scrappy group of not outlaws, but misfits. That is a well-worn dynamic. We've seen it in a bunch of stuff, including a ton of sci-fi content. And in this case, yeah, it did really feel like paint by numbers. None of the dialogue in particular stood out to me as like funny. They're trying to do the quippy thing again. One of the worst things that Marvel movies did for filmmaking, at least at the studio level, is that precedent of like weak, quippy dialogue, or people just state their character traits out loud back to each other over and over again. And I was already tired of it before this, but especially in this instance, I just don't care. I don't care. It doesn't feel new. It doesn't feel unique to this universe. It just feels like standard stuff. Like you pull this script away from this movie, change a couple of elements of the setting, it could work absolutely anywhere else. It could work as something that's a live action movie instead of animated. It could work as something that, I don't know, was made by a completely different studio. It just feels trendy. Well, maybe that's the wrong word because that implies that it feels current as well. No, it feels like trendy for something released in 2011, 2012, which if you're keeping track was quite a long time ago. I don't feel forward momentum, and that's what concerns me a bit about more recent Pixar releases. That is why I feel compelled to complain about more recent Pixar releases, and beyond that, there are personal motivations too. Like so many millions of other people, the golden age of Pixar means a lot to me. A lot of those movies are very affecting. I think it's some of the best animated work we've ever gotten, period, like in human history, at least for a couple of the movies. And for whatever reason, maybe for a reason I've identified, or maybe for another reason that I just haven't thought of at all yet, the magic isn't there. And it makes me sad. And I would have a very difficult time believing rank and file artists and animators are to blame at all. I don't think that's the case. It has to come down to some kind of leadership thing, because we know how good these people are. We know that it takes a lot to make it to Pixar in the first place. Just something about leadership, something about the decision-making process behind what to make and why, for what reasons, and how to execute it. At the very least, it's not working for me. I'm only speaking for myself here. Plenty of other people seem to be enjoying the movie, but if you relate to my perspective, then I hope that there's been some kind of value in sharing my thoughts here. I think that's about it, but thank you so much for joining me for the entirety of the video. I hope you have a very pleasant day. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.